I went to school with someone who was in one of my classes from China, and she had never heard of Tiananmen Square until she came to Canada.
The same as me.
And I remember hearing about this story because it was actually when she was at university. She just came for university, and just for me, you know, growing up in a culture where information is shared quite freely, this is such a common occurrence. People in China that don't even know their own pretty recent history because of the state. And I'm wondering if that is starting to break down, if people are finding ways, whether through WeChat or other ways to access the internet, where information is starting to get there, and if that's having an impact.
Information can get through, and there are software that break through the firewall, but the problem is in the mind. When I first got to Canada, I didn't want to believe Tiananmen Square existed. And that's self-censorship, self-filtering. It's because of an entire life of indoctrination in China. They have sort of programmed you to think that whatever the West said is only antagonizing forces from the West, evil West forces who are trying to hurt China somehow. So when you go out there, you hear those rhetorics, it's only their story, they're trying to attack you. And at the beginning, we get very defensive when people talk about like what communists are doing to Chinese people. Because it's a profound embarrassment to realize that your entire whole life belief system is built on a lie. It's really humiliating to confront that. So that's why a lot of Chinese people don't even want to listen to it. They don't want to hear the truth.
Why do you have so many Chinese people then coming to
I think people expect, and I have one Australian friend who told me, I usually just assume that these Chinese people, when they got off the plane, immediately they breathe the air of freedom and they're going to change their mind. No, it doesn't work like that. To be honest, for me, because I was raised in Chinese elite communist family, because my father was a communist member, and my mother, she was a professor in China. So for me, living there, except for the indoctrination and the constantly you're being watched over, all of that, economically and everything else in your daily life, it feels quite the same. Like there isn't going to be a drastic difference. And as Tom said earlier, yes, the infrastructures in China right now, for the people who live in big cities, will feel like, if not even better than living in the West. But the thing is, it takes a constant self-examination and an engagement to familiarize oneself with the Western democratic institution and process. And that's not a self sort of initiated act that every Chinese are going to do. And to be honest, maybe 10-20% of them would actually do that. So that's why you see a lot of Chinese students, they would defend communism like I did the first year in high school in their social economic classes in the West. They didn't go through that detoxing process from communism. So they're still going to keep that self-censoring that's going on. Anything that you guys say that's against China is against China, is anti-China. That patriotic sentiment is going to filter everything out. I remember when I was reading it, I was in college, and I was going through a very difficult process because in the first 13 years of my life, I lived under communism and received a lot of indoctrination. And one thing that is sort of becoming more and more, like I would become more and more aware about, is how I often rely on ideology and my teacher and the government's thinking for me, and so that I don't have to take responsibility for my own action. It's a relief in some way because you don't feel the weight of your individual decision, but at the same time, you never get to live authentic life. And I remember back in university, I was reading The Republic, and Plato described three kind of people. So the top class in the Republic is the gold people, people who are guided by reason, and then it becomes then comes the silver, which is guided by honor and glory. And then I suddenly realized in the past, a lot of the patriotic thinking, a lot of the enthusiasm about China, the nationalistic sort of point of view, and even defending communists as if I were defending my own culture, comes from mostly passion and the sense of honor and glory, but not from a place of wisdom and reason. And I think my favorite allegory in the world is the allegory of the cave, where Socrates described this process of a man who lived in a cave and seeing only shadows on the wall and never being able to see the truth in the world. And what he described, which is really moving, is when that person was loosened of his bound and be able to see that the shadow on the wall was projected by the fire behind him. And that's partial truth. But even that, it took so long for him just to recognize that part of the truth, to be able to comprehend it, and to put it in his mind that perhaps what he saw all his life was not the real truth, and there's a higher power. And then Socrates described this process of this man being dragged from the bottom of the cave to the outside world, the trouble, the struggle that he's gone through, the ability for him, the struggle he's gone through to be able to use his limbs again, to walk and to exercise his own reason, to his own wisdom, and to comprehend the world. I think it's at that moment that I realized there is just no safe net for me to fall back on. An ideology, propaganda, a certain rhetoric by the government is not going to prevent me from, it's preventing me from becoming a full individual. Only when I have the courage to exercise all my faculties, only then I become an authentic, true person, living to the best of my ability and potential. It's scary because you have to take responsibility for your own action. And you can't blame no one for the things you do. But at the same time, it's really empowering. So I think from then, I've been on this journey of reviewing my way of going through life and pausing occasionally to see if my impulses and my behavior, where the source is. Is it from my own reason, from what I want to be, who I truly am? Or is it from the outside world's influence?